you pray with me, please? Holy and loving God, come wherever we are right now and be with us. Touch us so that we might meet with you again once more in your word. We might feel your touch and find a word from you. Whatever it is that you want to speak to our spirits, I ask that you take my words and that you touch us with them. Lord, make them your own. I pray in your holy name. Amen. So today I want to ask a big question. A big question, which is, why is life so unfair? Unquestionably it is. Much of the world struggles with obesity, whilst others don't have enough food. Some have a good education, whilst it's reckoned that almost 1 billion people on the planet can't read or write. That's 1 billion. Half the world lives on less than a couple of pounds a day, while half the world's net wealth belongs to just 1% of the population. 10% of the world's population hold 85% of the wealth, while the remaining 90% of the population hold just 15% of the world's total wealth. Life is unfair. Some children have everything they need, whilst others live on the streets. Some children grow up healthy, whilst others never know what it is to be well, or may even die in childhood. I haven't even got to the natural disasters like earthquakes and hurricanes and floods and tornadoes and tsunamis and blight and drought and disease. Even without a pandemic, we can see that life isn't fair. And even if everything seems okay for you right now, then I hate to be a killjoy, but you have no idea what tomorrow might bring. Now, Solomon, who was the wisest man to ever live, wrote in Ecclesiastes 9, "Again I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favour to the skillful, but time and chance happen to them all. For no one," he said, "can anticipate the time of disaster. Like fish taken in a cruel net, and like birds caught in a snare, so mortals are snared at a time of calamity when it suddenly falls upon them." Life is unfair, that's obvious. But is it because life is supposed to be unfair? And if so, why would God make the world that way? Or is it because the world is actually supposed to be fair, but something's gone wrong? Well, there are lots of religious ideas that go with the latter. God makes a perfect world that has no sin, but Adam and Eve break a rule. Sin enters into the world and messes everything up. This was one of the Apostle Paul's favourite ideas. In Romans 5:12 he writes, "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death came through sin, so death spread to all because all have sinned." Paul places us in the middle of a storyline where God has to fix a world broken by the first two humans. For Paul, the Adam and Eve story in Genesis explains why Jesus came and died. Their sin, their mistake, becomes a kind of genetic fault that everyone inherits. Because everyone is descended from Adam and Eve, Paul reckoned that we must all therefore be born sinners. Jesus comes to fix that by paying for humanity's sin, as if God's just waiting for someone to come and to do as they're told to make up for what Adam and Eve did. And it works well up to a point. But the problem with this idea, I think, is that you just don't find it anywhere in the Old Testament except in the Genesis creation account. You'd think that if Adam and Eve were the reason for all of life being unfair, that Abraham or Isaac or Jacob or Moses or Daniel or someone else would have mentioned it. Curse Adam and Eve for their sin, the cause of all our woes. But zip. There's nothing until we get to Paul, who has his own ideas about an unfair world and why Jesus came and died. And it's easy to understand that he wants answers. Everybody does. But I think personally we'd be placing a huge burden on Paul if we were to say his answers were the only answers. He's just trying to make sense of it all like everybody else. And in fact, the Old Testament has a very different idea to Paul. In Ezekiel 18:20, we read that the soul who sins shall die. The child shall not suffer for the iniquity of the parent, nor the parent suffer for the iniquity of the child. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon themselves, and the wickedness of the wicked be upon themselves. Ezekiel's idea is very different to Paul's idea of inherited sin. Paul believes that because of Adam and Eve, we all deserve to be punished. But according to Ezekiel, we all stand on our own ground, and we don't inherit anything from those that have gone before us. Asaph has an idea. One of my favourite psalms is the 73rd Psalm. And in that psalm, Asaph looks about him and sees how unfair the world is. He writes, "I was envious of the arrogant. I saw the prosperity of the wicked, for they have no pain. Their bodies are sound and sleek. They are not in trouble as others are. They are not plagued like other people." And if you read Psalm 73, I can just see Asaph looking around him at the rich and famous who seem to have everything, sometimes at the expense of others. And he looks at their slim, buff bodies, their beautiful homes, their fast cars, their wealth, their popularity, and he says, hang on, how come they have it all and I don't? I'm a good person. I do good things. I'm faithful to God, but where does that get me? It seems like those who don't care are constantly taking advantage of those who do. That it's psychopaths that run the giant corporations and the everyday people suffer. Profits more important than people. Solomon wrote, "The quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one bungler destroys much good." Now, both Asaph and I wish the world would heed that gem of wisdom. And okay, maybe I've been projecting a little onto Asaph, but you get my drift. In the end, both Asaph and I agree that we'd rather be on the poor side and have a relationship with God than have lots of material possessions and not have felt the touch of God's love. I'd take a relationship with God, knowing that I'm held and loved by something much greater than me any day. But I also wouldn't complain if I had both. In Romans 20, the Apostle Paul advises that we just take it all on the chin. Life may be unfair, but we didn't create the world, so we have no right to complain. He writes, "Who indeed are you, a human being, to argue with God? Will what is moulded say to the one who moulds it, 'Why have you made me like this?' Has the potter no right over the clay to make use of the same lump, one object for special use and the another for ordinary use?" In other words, Paul says, this is the way it is. It's God's plan. Don't question it and play your part. Paul sounds like a frustrated parent with a child who's asking awkward questions. I can just hear it now. Why is life so unfair? Well, because of Adam and Eve. But then why did God put a tree there and tell them not to eat it? Well, because it was a test. But God created them and God's perfect. Why did God need to test them? Well, because God did. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to make any sense. It's God. Then why did God give us a brain if we're not supposed to use it? Look, it's God. You don't ask questions about God, and anyway, stop asking stupid questions. Now, of course, they're not stupid questions. And of course you should question assumptions about God, even if it's inconvenient for people like Paul. Let's turn the whole question around. What would the world be like if life was fair? What if only good people were successful and bad people always failed? What if the only person you were allowed to have a relationship with was your life partner and it was impossible to fancy anyone else in case somebody's heart got broken? What if relationships only ended when both partners died simultaneously? Raindrops would only fall on bad people. Only saints would win the lottery. Good people would get Netflix and Prime, whilst bad people would have to make do with the shopping channel. You know, the nicer you were, the richer you'd be. There's a a joke about a new restaurant in town. It's called the Karma. There's no menu, you just get what you deserve. Now, I'm not knocking karma, it makes as much sense as anything else. But imagine a world where everything that happened to you was your fault. If life was fair, then you'd get the flu because you did something wrong, not because you happened to sit in a bus in front of someone who was infectious. In fact, if the world is going to be fair, then we better take away choice, all choice. Because a bad choice might mean that you create a situation that isn't fair to someone else. So, no religion, just in case my idea of God isn't the same as yours. No creativity. What if it gave me an advantage over you? That wouldn't be fair. Why not just make every person the same? It's not fair if you're better looking than I am, or you're cleverer than I am. What if the world isn't broken? What if it's supposed to be unfair? In our reading today, Jesus tells us a story where the landowner pays everyone the same, whether they work for an hour or the whole day. It's not fair. But what if God made life unfair so that we'd have the choice whether or not to make it fair? Those workers could have all got together and split that money up more equitably. Nothing stopping them. But those who were excited about getting a day's wage for only working an hour certainly didn't want to give some of it to those who toiled all day. What if God made the world this way so that we'd have a choice whether to make it fair or not? People chose to put Jesus on the cross, a man who preached love and grace and equity. It wasn't right, it wasn't fair, and 2,000 years later, I think we still haven't learnt the lesson. Maybe life is unfair because that's the only way we can have the freedom to choose. And whether we choose to live a way that's fair and equitable, or in a way that puts us first and lets others take care of themselves, that's our choice. Perhaps it's a way of finding out who you are, and if you don't like what you see, making a change. You know, right now we're in a pandemic. Some people are choosing to look out for others and care for others. They're isolating when they'd rather be outside. They're working in hospitals and care homes or on buses or serving others in a multitude of ways, even if it's not 100% safe for them to do so. Why? Because they care and they want to live in a world that's fair, one in which we look after each other, even if there are those who believe that it's their right not to wear a mask or to go to a party or to go outside when they have symptoms, whatever. Perhaps God's grace is so great that God created a world where we could choose to be fair or not, loving or not, truthful or not, giving or not, so that we could decide whether we wanted to live in a world that was fair or not. Our choice, our world, our future, and we decide, we choose, each of us. In Deuteronomy 30:19, God says, "This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you that I've set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live." Our choice, plain and simple. Perhaps instead of creating a world where everything is fair and we have no choice, perhaps God is constantly asking us to choose fairness. My choice, your choice. Choose well, says God. Marcus Cole said, I used to think it was awful that life was so unfair. And then I thought, wouldn't it be much worse if life were fair and all the terrible things that happen to us come because we actually deserve them? And if you're wondering who Marcus Cole is, then rewatch Babylon 5. Maybe what God has given us is the bare bones of what can be heaven or what can be hell. And it's up to us to choose. The Bible's advice seems to be quite simply, choose well. God's grace may be infinite, but this world is not. We have a choice whether to care for our planet or not, care for each other or not, be fair or not. If you're waiting for God to create a world that's fair, then heads up, because maybe God's waiting for you. Amen.